Hi, this is Eli Ocheltree, the SnoKing Beekeepers Association. It's February 18th, 2026. It's our monthly third Wednesday meeting, open to the public. And our topic is going to be thinking like a bee. And we say make splits. The bees say they're thinking of it as generating new colonies. So the question is often posed as to split or not to split. But in my case, I want everybody to think about what you've learned about beekeeping, or for real, true, absolutely beginners, listen in and listen to what you are going to know besides what you learned in beginner class, where you learned how to name the parts and the different types of bees. And this is a queen, this is a drone. And then it gets interesting. That was overwhelming. This is the part where it gets interesting. First, I try to give credit to people on pictures, but I'm terrible about that. Announcements. You are so wonderful of all of you to show up so early that you get to listen to the announcements. In the newsletter, I had a really weird request. Spring cleaning. Could you please donate yarn and costumes, that anything that could be a bee, a pollinator, a flower. And if little girls or older gals or guys even want to wear their favorite festive dress, like that Easter dress or upcoming, it's too early for Christmas, but like the parade in Monroe will be August 29th, the first Saturday of the fair. And it's a great opportunity for us to go out and advertise ourselves as a SnoKing Beekeepers. It's also an absolutely family-friendly activity, and everybody can go. You don't have to find a babysitter. You don't have to feel like you're neglecting your spouse. My spouse will not walk with us, but he will be the pickup at the other end of the parade and ferry us back to the beginning of the parade. He's good that way, but he hates being in parades. Unless he's wearing a Boy Scout uniform, then it's okay. So yarn. The yarn is for a project to make something called a weather worm. And if you look it up online, you'll find the weather worm. Basically, it's a kindergarten level craft, but it's something that we can attach our little logo and name and contact information on a label and give them away, because everybody has free yarn. Yes. And before you throw it away, donate it to us. It doesn't take that much yarn per weather worm, but if you are going to give away something the 11 days of the fair, you're going to give away hundreds of it. I'd start by making 500, because I know we would give that many away easily with our name and our logo on it. And I'll have to put a picture in the next newsletter, okay? It's a real simple thing and everybody can make them. I'll send out the pattern. It's also a great thing to do at your schools or whatever too. It'll make sense if you look up weather worm, kindergarten craft. The Washington Pollen Atlas is part of a big national pollen phenology wheel or something like that. And they are asking for people to put pollen traps. It was in the newsletter, and I think complete details might have been in 2 newsletters ago. I can get you the information, email me, or go check the newsletters. And it's actually pretty easy to do. To just put a pollen trap on, and your curiosity. My curiosity got me involved in the capped brood survey. And they are supposed to supply, I don't know what kind of a pollen trap, but a pollen trap that you can put on for 48 hours. And I put a picture, I think, in one of the newsletters of the easy one that I love. The pollen trap, it fits on the front of the hive. It lifts on, it lifts off. It is the easiest thing. All plastic, little soapy water, clean. And you satisfy your curiosity, plus you have pollen that you can put back in your pollen sub patties and have some real pollen in there, not just expressed soy pellet or whatever. But the bees live on the pollen sub in their patties. Oh, we need ideas for social events. I know that Jen is starting to work on it. Mike too. Maybe a pancake breakfast might be the easiest to go out and meet. If you have ideas on that, better get your comments or ideas into Jen or Mike Gipperty, and their contact is in the newsletter. I did not put it right here. To join the swarm team, also Mike Gipperty or Allison Snow, since Mike takes vacations occasionally. I don't know if Allison does, but I know that Mike said he can't be here the whole month of April. I'll get their numbers back up on the homepage. They're not right now. I think I took them down for just a little while because the new and package suppliers needed to go right where I usually have the swarm numbers. Oh, today I'll talk about a lot of things, and I'm not going to talk the very lowest level. A lot of bee clubs try to talk to the very beginner. If you're a beginner, hey, you're welcome. Listen in. This is recorded and you can check out later. Okay. Go back and check it later, maybe even next year when it makes more sense. I'll try to explain as we go along, at least so you have the terminology. But if you have already received your certificate here or elsewhere, and you are a SnoKing member, you are welcome to come back and audit a class. Maybe even just view the playlist of the way we taught it. Everyone teaches a class differently, and between clubs, it's quite a difference. So if you'd like to come back and audit beginner or apprentice, and you already have the certificate, we ask you to pay the dues, the $30 for the year, but then that would be great. That's all we would ask of you. And then we'll just put you on the class email list so you get the handouts and you remember to come on that day of the week if you have questions for the question and answer period after each class presentation, which is the way we do it at every level. We also have those experience level discussion groups, and a week from today, probably continuing on with the topics that I'm talking about, which is thinking like a bee and why do they do what they do and how do we use it to work with them. So I am going to start. I made a little icon that says covered in beginner and apprentice, which means I'll explain it in question and answer afterwards, Q&A. You can ask for a very quick explanation during a presentation, but I'm honestly going to tell you, we already did it back then. And there's a lot that I'm going to assume that you know it exists, like how to make up a swarm kit. Generally what a swarm trap looks like. If you don't, we'll help you find that information. So going into the thinking like a bee, and you could call this to split or not to split. But I like to think of it the way a bee doesn't think of it as a split. To a bee, this is reproduction. If you end up with 2 queens and 2 colonies, you have done apical fission, I guess. You have split into 2, and if you do it successfully, if they both survive, they both have an active working queen, establish their brood nests, and overwinter next winter, they have succeeded. They have reproduced. Nature has succeeded. Well, beekeepers, we look at it sort of differently, and we have to give ourselves some rewards. Beekeeping, as I think you hear people say more and more often, it's not a how-to. It's not an engineering manual. It's not a set of directions you follow. And that's very confusing to a lot of people. If you kept livestock, it's a little easier. If you bred livestock or had livestock that ranges in some way, bees make more sense. And you start to see that you can enjoy it more as you gain skill in your craft. And if you look at this as a skill or a craft, it's lots more fun. And already after your first year, come on, admit to me that you aren't going to feel a little bit of pride as you put on your beekeeper outfit, go out to the apiary on the warm day, you open those top supers first, a little bit of smoke here, a little bit there. Maybe you've got liquid smoke or peppermint extract on your fingers, so you don't have to wear gloves and you don't really need smoke. And it's early in the year. Remember to stand not in front of the hive. Oh, in the back. I said stand to the side or back is what I meant there. Don't stand in the front. And you know how to kind of set the boxes over to the side, maybe even cover them up so the bees stay calm. You're calm. You're enjoying this. You are now coming up as a master beekeeper. You just know what's happening. But there's still a lot of concepts that you're finding as you go along. And you find that a lot of things are variables. There are some constants, but there's a lot of variables, and figuring out which are which. As you get more prepared every time you go out to the apiary, you can be more proactive. So you become more proactive And you're not always saying, oh, I should have bought something. Oh, I've got to run out to the store and get whatever. Okay. You're a little more in advance, ahead of things. Also, I notice a lot that as I developed as a beekeeper, and I watch other people do this too, they start looking more at the colony instead of the individual bee response. And that's really important when you're generating colonies. You start realizing I'm working with a colony. The living organism is the colony. The term superorganism, I don't know, sounds kind of made up to me until I'm comparing where I started as a beekeeper to now I see the colony as a whole. I don't look at the individual bees so much. Beginners actually start thinking about individual bees, and then you may realize, give yourself credit if you already did this, you shifted in thinking of the colonies as individuals. There's a lot I can't cover today, and that's why I've got that cute little icon up there. It says covered in beginner and apprentice. I'll probably cover it again in journeyman. The robbing. I talk about robbing quickly, but we don't have time to go through preventing it, the signs of robbing, and your response to robbing. Dearth. I don't have time again today. I don't think anyone wants to sit that long. Well, I talk about preventing the bees going into a dearth reaction, the signs of dearth happening and response to that. Dearth being the scarcity of nectar or pollen as perceived by the bees. Swarm collection. We don't have time for that, but Tony did a little bit on it. I was hoping he'd do even more. I think if you go back and look, I think he talked more about swarms in a previous year at a monthly meeting. Swarm kits. I don't have time to go through that, but it was in the newsletter and past newsletters and past monthly meetings on swarms. Swarm traps, bait hives, how to make one. Don't have time really for that today, but it is rather closely related to getting the bees to generate the colonies and the new colony, getting them to reproduce in a way that benefits you and them. So I'm not assuming that everyone knows everything about these topics, but we can answer the questions in the Q&A after this presentation, and I'll turn off the recording for that, or we can direct anyone to some useful material in a past SnoKing meeting, or you can join the Hive Mind group meeting a week from tonight. And you can also audit any class you'd like to review that you already have the certificate for. Okay, ready to talk about beekeeping. I don't know if anyone else uses the KISS idea at keeping bees. How to succeed at keeping bees with the Keep It Simple students principle. I'm not sure if somebody else thought that up, but for me, it's keeping the bees dry and safe, housing them in a way that they can protect themselves, their stores, from everything, wind, rain, predators, robbing bees, vespids, whatever. They can keep themselves as safe as they can, the best housing possible. Then feeding them well. If I'm not sure, I'm an advocate for the sugar's cheap. Right now, I hope everybody is going out and checking their hives. One after another, I'm hearing the beekeepers say, I've never seen the bees eat this much in a winter. They're going through it fast. Then treating for mites. We can never let up on the varroa mites. But the biggest thing I'm talking about today is sort of the do no harm part of KISS. And some people's splits and swarm collections that get installed do well and others don't. And if we really sit and look at it as a bee looks at it, I think we'll know why some colonies we generate and the bees generate do well and some don't. Okay, this is I wish we could get this book. If anyone can somehow sneak into the bee libraries and figure out where they put their How to Manage Beekeepers for Dummies, which is subtitled, What the Bees Wish That the Beekeepers Knew. So I wish we could find it. So far, no luck. Now, when we think like a beekeeper, and I've showed this diagram before, I think in other presentations or at classes, we think of it like right now we're doing winter checks, we're repairing, planning, setting goals in order. That's where our focus is. Then we want our hives to build population. Hopefully we're not taking dead outs out of our hives and autopsying and okay, hopefully not. But now we want them to build population, and we look at it that way. We want you to build population, maybe even splits, make some splits and get 2 hives. Then we want to maximize honey production, especially so we can get our surplus. Then we actually are looking at harvesting it. But then no matter how much we leave for the bees, they can still go into dearth because that's a pretty big bee population after the main flow with the blackberries. And so often we have to feed them a little. And by that time, we get serious about the varroa treatments that we've probably already done if we could possibly find time. Then we're downsizing for wintering. We're removing excess frames, boxes, definitely that queen excluder, no overwintering with the queen excluder. And we're looking at, do they have 60 pounds of bees and brood, 60 pounds of stores? Stores to the top, brood to the bottom. Okay, and then we start the whole cycle over again. That's the way we see our yearly cycle. But for bees, what are they thinking about right now? And they're not thinking about, boy, I hope we can make splits for that beekeepers and get lots of honey so the beekeeper can make a profit. No, they are right now with our crazy weather. It's been 20s again and again here at night. It was sleet, hail, and freezing rain today, but you know, still kind of 40-ish, but down to the 20s at night. I'm on my little breezy ridge. But a lot of people are in something similar. A lot of you are like 5 degrees warmer than that. I haven't really heard anybody, it's a definite 10 degrees warmer, unless you're right in Seattle. Seattle has a lot of thermal pollution, which you can enjoy. Your bees aren't having a bad winter in some ways. They're getting the benefit of all that thermal excess pollution, really, because it's really not natural for Seattle to be as warm as it is. But right now, the bees are clustering. Now, they maintained brood rearing as long as they could, which I can verify because I did 2 of the 3 collections for the capped brood survey, and I know what I always thought was, which was that they maintain having brood until there's a really sharp decrease in the temperature. And that's when I could no longer see the capped brood. Well, I actually didn't go in then, but I'm later on, for some reason, I got into 1 or 2 of the hives really quickly to put in food, and I could see, but I didn't dare go in and pull the frame out to verify. But they did have capped brood, even at my 476-foot elevation up here, with a little breeze, overcast, fog sometimes until noon. Okay, they still were maintaining brood into January. Seriously, the first weekend in January. I think then they finally gave up because it got so cold and they were clustered so tightly. But the reason they cluster to protect the brood, that's right, and to protect the queen, and they use less stores when the temperature goes down and they move less. And when I say they protect the queen, they can always raise another queen. What they actually are protecting is the contents of her spermatheca. She holds the genetic hope for the entire hive. Early in the spring, if she has to have been kept warm enough the whole winter that the sperm is still viable inside her spermatheca where she put it when she mated for that one period in her life. She has to be kept at about room temperature for that to happen, about 68 to 70. She can't go much lower than that for very long. So they are busy maintaining temperatures that we'll talk about later, because if you look at this from the point of view of a bee, that is really what they had to do and what they have to continue to do through the whole year. The queen has to be protected from temperature extremes, and whenever they have brood, they have to maintain the low 90s inside the brood nest. 91 to 94 is what I hear a lot of. Okay, but after they've survived all that, they have to build population, replace that queen if possible, and ideally reproduce, swarm. They start collecting honey and pollen, and they collect pollen at first, but as soon as they have enough foragers, the priority is really on collecting nectar and then hoarding it, again, with priority on the honey. When they don't have it, that's when you see them collect a lot of pollen in late in late summer, about the time that the dearth is happening, the nectar dearth, and then the robbing. And that's when they have to get defensive and they have to reduce brood rearing. Missed an E there, rearing. And then after that late summer, early fall dearth is done, they collect nectar, the knotweed flow if there is some, and they actually start downsizing inside their hives. Loose nectar that never was ripened into honey and capped gets used up. And then things get moved around. You watch them move as they pull in for the winter. And that creates empties that we have to take out when we winterize. And you'll see that you're taking out a lot of frames, enough to come down in the number of boxes. Okay, I'm stating the obvious, but it's kind of fun to realize that you did this. And then the last thing they were doing before they really had to give up hope and cluster tightly when it really got cold, they were scouting around in another nectar dearth. They were somewhat defensive and they had to reduce the brood nest down, but mine did not give up until January. I can vouch for that. So that's the schedule they're on. That's what their concerns are. And as beekeepers, you've lived through that cycle. A number of you have lived through it a number of years now. And you've observed that each colony has its own personality. And it's always in constant change because much of it is cyclical, it's seasonal, and you'll see its personality change according to the amount of stores in the hive, and that's constantly varying, the size of the brood nest, which varies quite a bit from one time of the year to another, the age distribution within the colony. By that, I mean, how many of the bees are just emerged young and how many are old grouchies? Okay, because early in the spring, you can go in when there's a lot of very young bees. And like people say, you just don't get stung. You could almost do it without your veil. I'm not recommending that. But you can definitely do it with lightweight gloves. And some people, that's their time. They get to enjoy doing it without any gloves at all. Nah, I don't want to do that. But although I did do peppermint on my hands once, I don't remember if liquid smoke worked, but I remember I did that and tried it and it did. I thought it worked. Only early in the spring though. But that's because your age distribution is skewed. You know those demographic curves they do of a country's population, how many young people, how many old people, and all the way from age just emerged, born for people, but emerged for a bee. And then the curve goes over to the really old ones. I call them the old grouchies because they've got nothing to lose. They're old foragers, they're dying anyway, and they're going to go out with a blaze of glory, probably, and see if they can sting something on the way out. But that age distribution is really, really different and allows us to do certain things. And the topic today really is how we generate new colonies. We call them splits. But it's easier to do when you can freely merge parts of different colonies together and they don't get upset. Can't have two queens meet, but you can borrow frames from here and move them over to there, making sure that you do have completely healthy colonies before you do that, or that you are only giving in one direction from a strong, healthy colony to an unknown health colony, a smaller colony. Okay. But that skew of the age distribution changes the entire temperament of the colony when they're young versus later in the year when brood rearing in the brood nest is decreasing somewhat, and a lot of them are old grouchies. Sorry, I get to say that because I'm an old grouchy sometimes. Queenless behavior. Bees do not always react the same way to everything. And this is one place that I have seen colonies behave completely differently when they are queenless. There's the ones that go aggressive. I've seen them go listless. I have seen a queenless colony go completely into slurping down sugar water, and I knew there was no brood and no pollen coming in, and finally go inside, and they didn't know what to do. But they said, well, we can do one thing. So they were emptying the sugar feeders and putting away funny honey. They had no brood to take care of, no queen to take care of, and they didn't know what to do. I rescued him, gave him a queen. That behavior, each colony with this personality, it changes with each queen. Their personality changes with how much they get out to fly. How many flight hours do they have? How early in the year or how late in the day or year? And all of this is going to make a difference on how easy it is for you to generate new colonies. Sometimes it's really easy to work with the bees, and sometimes it's not. The number of drones that they raise and support in each colony is completely different. If you have more colonies as you go along, you'll find that the 10 to 15% that you get told is really an average. Each colony has an optimal colony size, and some of them are not happy with having more than, say, 30,000 bees, and others, oh, 50, 60,000, the more the merrier. But the ones that aren't happy with more than, say, 30,000, they're what we would call more swarmy. They're not going to put, they sense that they are coming up to a certain point, and you can't know which colonies it is in advance unless you went through it with the same queen the year before. She's a second winter queen. Now, there's a lot of troubles with new colonies, making the splits, getting them going. And back at the KISS, I was talking about housing and feed and bromide treatments and do no harm. Well, it starts right away with a lot of beekeepers. The splits just aren't working for them, or the split they did in spring doesn't work in late summer, fall, or it doesn't work with this queen, but it worked with the other. Sometimes the bees perceive it as inadequate housing, inadequate protection. Maybe they're getting robbed by the larger hives in the apiary, larger colonies in the apiary, or any larger colony within flying distance. Maybe they're not getting the feed they need to brood up, to get the population, to build up in population, to protect themselves and to get well established and outpace any other environmental stresses that are coming their way. When beekeepers set up new colonies, sometimes they fail to distribute the different ages, the subpopulations inside the population of a colony to all the splits, all the colonies that they're creating off that donor colony they started with, because they haven't thought about it. And this, I hear this often in late summer and early fall. People are trying to make a split then. And I'm going, okay, but what's your brood nest look like? Oh, I haven't got any, but I'm sure that they'll make a brood nest. Well, actually, it's late summer, fall. It might not be a good time to try making a split unless you feed them first, you get them to create a brood nest, and they're in a growth pattern that now they want to raise a new queen. They want to do it. And they're all on board with it. Everybody's focusing on the goal, the whole colony. And sometimes people forgot to provide a queen or queen potential. This sometimes happens after people use formic acid. They lost the queen, but that's okay. The bee school raised another one, right? Yes, if the formic acid did not kill all your eggs and young larvae. You need to monitor. As a beekeeper, you have to monitor. And it happens too with splits the same way. People fail to monitor the queen post-installation to verify that she is there, she's mated, she's actually laying, and she's been accepted, and they're not making supersedure cells because they've already decided they don't want her, which happens sometimes because we don't know why. When we're making new colonies and we're working with the bees, we can't ignore their perception of space. Beekeeper that ignores the bee perception of space is going to have troubles. A couple of things push your bees to generate their own colonies, which we call swarming. Crowding, combined with that springtime reproductive impulse with the longer day length, right? And we're going, why are they saying they have a crowding situation? I gave them another box above the queen excluder, above the little honey barrier that's on the topmost brood box. Why aren't they going up and using that space? If you leave a bee ceiling in, when you add space, bees see it as a ceiling sometimes. Sometimes they don't know to go above it. In the wild, bees actually tend to draw their comb downward. if you actually look at feral beehives and different diagrams you've seen, you may not have really thought about it because the bees end up with the honey at the top and the brood at the bottom by wintertime. But actually, they choose to do that. They choose which way they draw the comb. We manage that. So we've kind of created a problem where we've put a bee ceiling there. So the bees are crowded when they don't see space below the bee ceiling. And it can be the inner cover. It can be a queen excluder they dislike. I'll show you a picture of one that causes a lot of troubles. There's one style of queen excluder that I just don't even want it around. I don't even want to show it to anybody except in a picture. Don't use this one. It sometimes works, but it usually doesn't. Or we've got that honey arch that they started to form over the brood chamber, and now you put another box up there. They may not have time to move the honey so that they expand the brood nest without jumping up above. And that's not necessarily something they're comfortable doing. They may just say, we're out of space. We're crowded. Let's move. The other way crowding happens is they fill it up. They don't have space to fill with nectar during the flow unless they backfill into the brood nest. The queen does not have empty cells to lay in, and they have that awareness. It's not a direct signal that she gives, but they are aware of it. So as I said, the bee ceiling can be something you didn't think of. The inner cover we intend to be a bee ceiling. That makes our lives a lot easier, not having bees draw a comb above it, which they will do if they really get desperate. Sometimes they will go up into the feeder and start drawing out comb because you didn't give them enough space. But the honey barrier, the queen excluder, sometimes people don't think of those as ceilings. And up above that can be the most gorgeous, unfurnished attic space that they refuse to use. And you put up that entire super up there with blank comb, and they don't see a reason to go up there. Another way that we cause crowding is we actually do it on purpose because we don't want small hives. This statement here, a hive of 60,000 produces 50% more honey than 4 hives of 15,000 each. That's a lot more honey. And it's a lot easier to take care of one large hive than 4 small. However, if you gauge this wrong and your hive doesn't want to go to 60,000, it's one of those 30,000 or something hives, then swarming is your honey crop flying away. And you end up with, instead of the top graph, where you started with January with very few bees and kept going down, and in the spring you built up the population, and the peak forager population hit right when the peak of your big nectar flow like blackberries hit, and you just, wow, you got surplus honey, the bees are happy, you're happy. But the bottom graph is if the bees built up too fast for what they perceive, if that happened, then they split. When they split, you end up with 2 small hives, two small colonies, neither one of which peaked at the time to give you the maximum honey production. So sometimes we push it to the limit. I think in commercial apiaries, they really do that. There's my queen excluder picture. The one at the bottom, if you look at it and you think it through, it is possible to basically block almost all bees going up and down through it because of the way these slats go. If I space my top bars of my frames underneath this is lying on top of a brood box. If I do it without thinking about it just right, I can put frames so that the lines that are solid are just over the center of the top bars of the frames below. I can show you the apiary. I should probably try to get a picture of it. It ends up almost completely blocking the bees. They can wiggle their way through, but they don't really want to. That's when a queen excluder turns into a honey excluder. They don't want to go up and use up above. It also can trigger that feeling of congestion. We're too crowded. The wire ones, you don't have that problem with. The plastic ones can also sag and cause some problems there. So in beginner and apprentice, we spent a lot of time, and I think I've got very quick pictures coming up, of things called reverse supering frame rotation. Oversupering I mentioned. I don't think I ever showed you a picture of replacing filled comb with empty comb. And you can do a little bit of management that way inside the brood nest or inside right above the brood nest and the honey supers to convince the bees, okay, point out, hey, you got room here. Oversupering. Trying to get them to go into a box you've added above. And with no queen excluder, you may still have to have what they call a bait frame. And again, we go through that in beginner and apprentice. Something that's not empty. Frames above the crowded area. And sometimes what you have to do is pick a frame from the crowded area, move it up into the new box, which otherwise has blank foundation, and the bees don't want to go in there. If you are going to use a queen excluder, you must use it correctly. It's either removing or correctly using that queen excluder that will help. And there's another method which I'll mention, but it would take a whole session by itself to really explain how it works. It's called demarré. And demarré is separating the queen from most of her brood. And you create the illusion that she has lots of space to lay and that there's brood nests that she hasn't filled up yet because she can't get to it. That is a correct use of a queen excluder, separating the queen from the brood inside the same hive stack. I'll show it quickly. Now, there's a lot of ways to split a hive, and there's a lot of reasons. And you will do it differently depending on what your purpose is. And sometimes I know I have met beekeepers who were told, as soon as you see a swarm cell, you need to split whatever hive it is. And they ended up splitting everything in half and half and half and half, and ended up with, from a couple of hives they started with, about 20 small splits. And they said, what am I supposed to do now? Well, there's other ways to relieve congestion and avoid that. And quite possibly, if I could have seen them, I could have helped figure out what the bee's perception of crowding was that led to doing so many swarm cells. Or it may have been bad genetics. I can't tell you that it wasn't. It wasn't there. But you shouldn't be splitting that many times. Sometimes you just need congestion relief, and you need it only temporary before the main flow, like the blackberry flow, and you can remerge it. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize is easy to do, especially with small colonies and especially earlier in the season. During dearth or robbing times of the year, okay, it could be more difficult, but remerging small colonies is not a problem. You've made a split. The queen didn't thrive. Nothing looks wrong. Or you discover the queen's a drone layer, something happens, you can merge them back together. There's no reason you can't do that. Bees are very gregarious. You give them full tummies and a reason to be together, and they're happy. The queenless split is quite happy to join the one with the queen. Fill their tummies first and then introduce them. Apiary building. Some people want to build up their apiaries and they want more colonies. There's also income generation. Yay, a nuke, producing a nuke, honey, if you get that keep all your bees and reemerge as necessary and manage to get your honey production back up. There's also pollination contract fulfillment, which I don't think most people do. I would recommend against getting involved and helping somebody fill their pollination contract because they need that last 20 hives. They promise to pay you really well. You're probably not going to get the same equipment back. You could be picking up diseases. It's too much risk for me. But if you decided to do that, that's a way you would split only to get what you needed into a pollination box with the extra box, and you have met exactly the contract. 6 frames of brood, a laying queen, maybe so many frames of stores. It's something like that. And each state actually will have different standards. Washington State does have one, and 6 frames of brood sticks in my mind. Deep frames covered with bees at a temperature of, I can't remember, 60 or something. The other reason there's more than one way to split a hive is because it depends on what you've got available in resources and current conditions. And I want to talk a lot about temperature. I talk a lot about congestion today, but also about temperature. For example, to make your new colony, what's the number of bees, brood, and frames that you can use and that you need to use? What's the source of your queen? Major problem if you're trying to raise your own queens in this area and it's early in a cold, damp spring. It depends, and that starts to lead into it depends on temperatures, ambient, outside temperatures, the weather, and your individual circumstances, which we call microclimate. There's another factor too. It depends on the amount of time and effort the beekeeper can give. There's times when if somebody's talking to me, and maybe you experience this too, people are asking about how to make a split. Oh, but I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. I know I can't be back. Oh, that might change what you recommend. You might recommend buy a queen. Don't try to get the bees to raise one, for example. You might say, you're not going to be back for 2 weeks. You don't want to lose 2 weeks of one part of a hive you've split in two, not having a queen, probably getting robbed out, would be prone to disease, all kinds of problems. So you might say, okay, if you're going to do that, but I really would get that queen if you possibly can and get a release before you leave. And if you can't, you have to leave almost right away, talk to me and we'll do a fast release. There's ways to do it. That number of bees, how many bees do you need? It depends on the season. And this is where I get upset with the internet. I keep saying, it's not Georgia, it's not Alabama. Okay, the number of bees you need depends on the season. Really early or late in our beekeeping season is going to require more bees. In the beginning, it's going to require more because it's cold, damp, and you've got a problem of holding heat in the hive. For a hive to grow, brood must be maintained in the low 90s, 91 to 94 degrees Fahrenheit, close to our body temperature, even with late frosts. And that's why I highly recommend, until you want to experiment, until you're taking the risk, that's fine. It's your bees. But until you're ready to take risk, not less than 5 frames, until you're sure the last frost is past. Generally, people can't do 2 frame splits west of the Cascades until you hit like July. Then the problem in late July, August is those are weak hives. If the vespids or the other stronger beehives, bee colonies, find those 2 frame colonies, they may just rob them out. And that's actually been my experience one year with the mating, with the queen mating nukes. Had a lot of them. Yep, the vespids. That year it was the yellow jackets found them. A few bald-faced hornets too, but mostly yellow jackets. But there's ways around that. If you want to split down to, say, 3 frames, and there are actually some in what's called a queen castle, picture coming up, a 10 frame divided in such a way that you could have separate compartments with a queen in each compartment, 2, 3, or 4. Then at least they're sharing heat stability and they're kind of together, and it might help cut down the robbing problem. 5 frame hives really can discourage robbing. There's enough bees there to do it. Somebody can do the guard duty. So I talk a lot of negatives today. When is it time to generate new colonies? And the bees are ready for new colony generation when it would relieve their perception of congestion, when it would help those strong colonies, especially those overwintered ones, to reproduce. And even if they can't do a full swarm, they like to have a new young queen. A lot of colonies want their queen superseded every year in a mother-daughter type supersedure, even when you've held them, kept them with every management strategy you could come up with, and I did this last year. No matter what I did, they wanted a new queen and they were going to supersede her. Had to accept that. Swarm season is kind of mid-May to June. This is a really good question and answer discussion point, okay? When you're seeing it, when you expect to see it this year. The odd thing about this year is the frog chorus started up in January. The frog chorus is the soil is warming, the water, the bodies of water, including our water saturated ground and every little puddle and tiny little whatever everywhere that we have. Minnesota, land of 1,000 lakes, has nothing on the parts of Washington I live in. So I heard the frog chorus that early. Even though we've dropped to the 20s, we've done a lot of times we've been in the 40s. And that tells you the way nature is seeing it. So it'll be fun. I am used to the frog chorus coming in about the Ides of February, just about now. That's I consider the standard time in my area. Everybody's area is different. I'm not in the lowlands. I'll bet a bunch of you, I don't know, you may have heard the frog chorus the whole time. Now, this slide is probably very familiar. You know the recipe to generate a new colony. You get your box and you start putting in. You got to have potential for a queen or a queen. Queen or a frame with swarm cells or that very small larvae. You need some brood. That brood pheromone, the hive's focus, plus that's the new workers coming up right there to support the queen and really get things going. A good age distribution, as I was talking about, it's an odd concept. We don't talk about age distribution, but we think about it as beekeepers. We know this hive is really wrong. There is no open larvae, or there is no capped brood, but there's a lot of open larvae. But are they going to be able to replace the ones that are open brood? There's no capped. Are they going to be able to replace the nurse bees fast enough? Because now the nurse bees have to stay on duty that many extra days. So age distribution, very important. Why it can be very difficult to make those splits. One of the reasons it can be very difficult to make those splits that people talk about. I want to split before winter. And they start to do that in the dearth, the robbing season. The brood nest has dropped. It's just, okay, we're past that beginner stage, most of us, so we understand. But I would feel sorry when people try that and don't understand why it doesn't work. We take advantage of the reproductive urge as much as possible. Okay, brood, stores, some stores, and feed too. Stores, especially capped honey and liquid syrup, convince bees that all is well, there's enough food to raise the brood on, and they are in a flow. When we feed them sugar syrup, we are tricking them. We are creating a nectar flow that doesn't exist. And we take the consequences of that as they build up. And if it's a really long, cold, wet spring and they built up early, we have to keep them going because we started this population increase. I have ended up in that trap. Then we need enough frames to fill in the box. Big empty space is really bad in beehives. It's hard for the bees that are there to patrol an area that's completely empty. It's really easy for vespids and robber bees to sneak in the front door and around them in that empty space on the sides of the hives. So if you have to use a 10-frame deep box and you've only got 4 or 5 frames in the center, you still need to put the rest of the frames in or use something to fill that space. There's a concept of a dummy board, a follower board, and they're really easy to make out of insulation sheets and the wooden frames for just the wooden part of the frames. You can make your own dummy boards rather than paying like $20 each or whatever to Man Lake. Then in this recipe, if you can shake in extra bees without shaking the queen in, unless you meant to put her in, and you shouldn't be shaking her, you should be setting her in. Extra bees to keep the numbers up it's insurance. And then you need to make sure the bees are being fed. Robbing screen or entrance reduction, especially this is now a weak colony, weak in terms of numbers. Then mark the calendar for monitoring follow-up. Don't forget that. And again, if you're leaving on 2 weeks vacation, I'll give you all the advice I can on how to beef up that nuke in any way you can. Protect it in any way you can if you know you're going to have to go on vacation. Then there's enhancements. What enhancements are needed if the temperatures are still low? Shaking in those extra bees is a help. If you're putting them into a bigger box. Maybe you can put more honey storage on the side, more insulation, insulated top. What can you do to help that newly growing colony maintain the low 90s for brood development? I had to put this in. I did not get to writing up every way that you could make a split. But this is one that makes you think. Zach Lamas and he's not a commercial beekeeper, he's a researcher. As far as I know, he doesn't have a lot of hives, but Ian Stepler does have in the thousands up in Canada, Manitoba. But if you really need an easy way to set up a split, in this case, maybe you just need five good frames, and you can select them out. You got stores, you got the brood, you got what we talked about, the recipe for a good new colony generated. And instead of trying to figure out where the queen is, and maybe it's cold, maybe you don't have time to really look for the queen. So instead of trying to find out where she is, if you get all the bees down to the bottom box, place a queen excluder on. Then you've got 5 of the frames that you made sure the queen wasn't on, and you put them back on top of the queen excluder in another box. Cover the whole thing up. By the next morning, you've got the number of bees you need, the minimum number of bees you need to cover the brood that you put up there, because you did, and up there to work on and you could just finish filling in the frames and pick up that whole box, and you have your split. This method, in a sense, is used by commercial beekeepers. Commercial beekeepers, yeah, sometimes they have the time to go through it and pick out the queens, but often they just say, we don't have time. We don't have to get it perfect. We can have an error rate. And what they often will do is go through, and if they overwintered in 2 deeps, all they have to do is slide a queen excluder between each 2 deeps, going down the apiary. Come back in a few days, whenever it's convenient, and look to see if the top one or the bottom one has eggs. They immediately know where the queen is. They just have to be careful of transferring again, and they can know where the queen is, and they know which part of the split now needs a queen. Or they need to make absolutely sure, if they're going to let that queenless portion of the donor colony, if they are going to let it raise its own queen, they need to make the quick check that there's eclosing larvae. Feed it, protect it, entrance reduction, etc. There's a lot of things that beekeepers do like that when they upscale. When you scale up, you just don't have the time to do everything that we enjoy as hobbyists doing ourselves. But as you scale up, you look for things like that. And I thought that was worth putting in here, because it makes you think of other ways that you could make your life easier if you scale up the number of hives you have. Let's see. Oops. Okay, you want to start making splits. The first thing is to make sure you can. And you're going to have to do this by evaluating. Let me see if I can get this. If I can get it. I'm having trouble with one thing on my. Well, you're going to need to. I'm sorry, I can't read my whole screen. It's a problem. There we go. Start generating the new colonies. Okay, you're going to check for readiness, and you're going to read the colony, not individual bees. You're looking at the colony as a whole. Is this a good time? Is it not too early to make splits to generate new colonies, the way the bees are seeing it, by looking at the colony? Well, you can do that by counting frames of brood and frames of stores, and maybe you've got frames of pollen, which is great if you've got that too. It's late enough in the spring. You could check the slide out board for debris. You've done the varroa treatments maybe, and you can see the drop. You can see if they're ready, or if you would rather keep them in one colony a while longer while you do another treatment because there was too much of a drop, or the alcohol wash showed too many varroa. So you can start doing all of that. One problem I've seen is people misinterpreting behavior. particularly entrance traffic. When they see pollen baskets coming in and out, they go, oh, there must be lots of brood inside. Possible, but if the foragers have no nectar to collect, they will all be collecting pollen baskets because there's no nectar to collect, which may mean there's no stores of honey on the inside. Looking at the front, some people can't tell the difference between friend and friend contacts and friend versus foe contacts. I've seen video posted on Facebook and I look at it and I say, yes, they're interacting on the landing board, but I don't think that's a friend to friend. Hive colony, hive mate to hive mate. Sometimes people will see queen cups and they think that means the bees are verge of swarming. It's important to know that just some hives do that. And after a year or two, you probably have had a hive that makes queen cups and they just sit there unused, dry the whole season. Reading colony behavior. So looking at the individuals can get you into trouble, but when you're looking at the colony as a whole, it reinforces what you already know about bees and it reinforces how you're going to manage them. Here's bees hanging out together, purposeful. Heads toward the inside of the hive, tails toward the outside. Here's a package. These bees were dumped together. Some of them had never seen each other before, and they got dumped into a package, weighed out into 3 or 4 pounds of bees, and they're all forming a cohesive unit. They are helping, they are congregating. They want to be together. They're gregarious. Look at how they're hanging, head up, tail down. Of course, there is a queen in the cage there, and there's a syrup cup over here that they're feeding on, but all hanging out. This is also important when we're looking at the fronts of our hives in the spring. If there are bees in late spring hanging out and they're moving all around in different directions, that could be a swarm getting ready to take off. On the other hand, look at the picture right next to it, where again, head is in one direction, tail in the other direction, and they are organized. That's bearding. Now, bearding in the summertime, we think of that as, oh, the bees have come out of the hive because it's getting too hot and too humid inside, and the honey is ripening, and they just need to get out of the hive for a while and make space. And maybe they're hanging out like the ones all the way on the left. They're actually helping with their wings to create an airflow that will help ventilate and help dehydrate the honey. However, bearding in the spring, it could be a ventilation problem. I would increase the ventilation slightly. It is possible they're telling you they're getting congested. They may not be in swarm mode yet, but that is a signal, if that happens in the spring, that something needs to be adjusted. Maybe just ventilation. So before you ever get into, you're going to go out there and you're going to make splits. You are going to do a health check on your frames. You're going to go look at them, see that you have compact brood, good laying queens, no signs of disease. This queen, we can even see her spiral laying pattern. This is upside down. The beekeeper is also making sure that there's egg laying going on by using the sun over the shoulder to come down into the bottom of the brood cells and be able to see the eggs. That still takes really good eyes. I use an LED flashlight myself. Screen bottom boards are a great way to check. If you see a bunch of bee parts, ripped open comb or something, okay, that's a problem. When you see something like a pile of bees like this, you probably don't want to make a split off that hive, right? I think so. I think we'd agree on that. Actually, you don't want to make a split off a hive that's doing this either. And this looks to me like a late summer, early fall. The bees are cutting back on brood nest, and instead of letting the queen lay in here, they're taking the eggs as fast as she lays them, and they're backfilling the brood nest with pollen, which tells me they're also in a nectar flow, and they are in a if they are nectar dearth instead of a nectar flow, there's always pollen, but they would put nectar in if they could late in the year, but they can't find any, not enough. They're using it up as fast as they get it. So instead, the foragers are out of work if they go to get nectar. So they are packing in pollen. This is actually a colony that has enough stress already dealing with dearth, and it's cutting back on its brood nest. This could make it difficult to even introduce a queen, much less get them to create another colony. This is something that makes more sense as you do this every year, right? You see anything like this? These are not colonies from which you would want to draw anything. You don't want to spread whatever it is that's going on in those frames. Here's the dearth one again. This one is a little harder to know what's going on. This is from my first year or two of having bees, and I didn't know what brood disease was. And this is one of the ways that the bees are barely handling it, barely handling it. They're surviving. They limped through one winter. Look at this spotty brood pattern. They were taking out, I think, disease larvae as fast as they could. I call this EFB-like illness. The hive can limp along, but it never does well. If you have a hive that looks like this, it's probably they're fighting brood disease and they're doing a good job of it, but not enough to overwinter successfully year after year. Remember in the splits, how to generate a new colony, or what the beekeeper calls a split, you have to have queen potential. And then you have to go back and check for it. And this is where a queen wheel becomes really handy, because here we are. This looks like a capped queen cell. Could emerge any day. If we don't know when it emerges, we can go up here and say, okay, it might have been ready to emerge. It might have been on beginning of day 16. If it emerged, okay, the soonest we should have eggs would be probably after 6 days, because mating flights are known to take, on the average, take place 6 to 10 days after the queen emerges. So those are kind of handy. It's a handy tool. That's what a queen calendar helps you do. But if you didn't see that queen and you didn't see your eggs, you've got to keep watching the calendar and coming back at intervals where you could. More unhealthy brood, except the top two, especially the top right, is definitely healthy. The top left is probably healthy too. The top right is, that looks like a nice worker brood, hexagonal paving stone pattern. On the left-hand side, that could be hygienic behavior. If that bee that's emerging there is in fact emerging, looking healthy, these chewed little incisions that have been refilled, those can be a hygienic behavior artifact. Everything can be well with that hive. You really need to check closely. And then while you're checking, you may also be finding swarm cells, or there's just been a supersedure. If there's just been a supersedure, it's not going to be that hive is not going to be a good candidate for using it. You might be able to take some stores or something off it, but basically it's going to have a huge brood break and an interruption. And if it's early in the year, it needs time to rebuild. So before you decide you are going to do the splits and which colonies you're going to use, you need to go in and check that. In the spring, I've seen this actually happen in the spring, but it can also happen after a queen fails to mate in our cool, damp winters. It's all drone larvae in a brood pattern. It is a drone laying queen. This is not laying workers. And you can tell because she went around, she kept trying to lay the eggs, and the workers were giving up, and yeah, it's in a worker size cell. So what they did was the workers went around and raised some of the larvae, because there's nothing else to raise. And they're nurse bees, right? They're worker bees. They're supposed to raise brood. And all they're given is drone, and it's in the wrong size cell. Well, they just sort of enlarged here or there, enlarged some of the brood cells, and went ahead and raised the brood. But if you were to look at this hive as a whole, as I did, this is a drone laying queen. And I don't hear people mention it often enough, so I'm afraid people aren't diagnosing it. Queens, you do have to keep an eye on queens. You also have to keep an eye on excess queens. We just had the pictures of too many supersedure cells, and a number of them were capped. And sometimes bees don't have good common sense. You as the beekeeper have to smash back to say two. I'm going to go a little faster because I've been talking longer than I intended to already. So let me see what would really be interesting out of what I'm saying. Success or failure? one year things work and the next year they don't. Let me see. Here, I give the internet a bad time. Splits, the way people try to do them in Western Washington, sometimes fail because this is not the Deep South. You can't split too early in terms of the colony health, and that includes numbers and that brood nest. And a spotty brood nest pattern sometimes clears up with good weather, extra feed, but not always. Good stores, population. If you try to do it too early, you may end up with both parts of a hive that you've split not making it. Splitting too late in the season, you're running into the problems of robbing, dearth, the lack of a reproductive urge in late July, August, the wrong age distribution for queen support. Actually, as a note, when trying to introduce a queen in late summer, early fall, again and again, people will tell me, I don't have any brood there. I haven't had any brood for a long time. I'm trying to introduce a queen. They won't accept her. And I go, well, yeah, there's no brood nest. She doesn't have a place where she goes into action, and everybody comes there and takes care of the queen and supports her. If you could possibly get a queen with even a frame of her own brood, that would really help. Or any brood, especially open though, and someplace she could lay right there. When I talk to people, other reasons that the splits fail, they didn't complete the split. They didn't shake in the extra nurse bees, and then they put the small hive right next to the large one that they took the resources off of. They didn't understand the importance of open brood and having that full age distribution, especially younger bees. And somebody told them, more Deep South people, that you don't need to feed syrup and pollen sub because there's plenty in this area. That's true, but you just created a weak colony, and there's a stronger colony within flying distance, almost for sure. And they didn't reduce the entrance. They didn't want to block the bees coming in and out. And they didn't go back and monitor and check. Really important. I know. We do all that work and then we still have to monitor and come back and check. But there are a lot of stresses that beekeepers don't even recognize as stresses on bees. In July, August, it will be the capped honey is falling, the stores, the pantry, and bees they just are in survival mode. They're not in let's split, let's raise queens, let's accept new queens mode when they're starving. They need to be fed if you're going to try to change their behavior. In the early spring, even a week of inclement weather, 3 or 4 days actually can make a difference. And bees have a hard time when the rain is stop-start because their waggle dance system, where the scouts go out, that takes a few hours, come back, do the waggle dance, get some interest, take some recruits out, they go out, they come back, they waggle dance. And if there's a good source, the bees build up in a 24, 48-hour period, start really utilizing it. That's the way they work best and most efficiently. Well, suppose it's only clear skies for 2 days, and then it rains again. And this keeps happening. For bees, that's stop and start feeding, just the same as if you stopped and started feeding them. Pollen is not a complete food. Bees die on pollen if that's all they can bring in the fall and all they can bring in the spring. They can't get the carbs they need, especially if it's cold in the fall and in the spring. And yes, as beekeepers, we have to disrupt when we go into the hives, but as little as possible as we get more experienced. And I already talked about robbing pressure and dearth. Dearth is an interesting one because in the spring as well as in the fall, people will say their hives swarmed. Well, but they took everything with them. They didn't leave half the hive behind. They left. That's really an absconding. That's really there's no food. We're starving. No food, no brood, let's fly. If you don't have enough food to raise brood, you need to get out of there. It is too early. Whenever you see one of these conditions, when the donor hives are facing, they're having trouble having enough bees. They have a low adult to the brood ratio they're trying to build up. the brood nest doesn't look right, like some of those awful pictures I showed you. The freezing weather is not passed. And that means that even if unless you buy a queen, this is a good reason for purchasing queens. If you are going to do splits early, if the weather is not going to allow mating, if the drones aren't yet making exercise flights, there aren't queen cells in your hives. There's a timing, the bees time that. And purchase queens are becoming available earlier, but if they're not yet available, you're not going to be able to do that. A large part of why I say it's different and we're not the deep south is we have this thing called evaporative cooling. I call it hive hypothermia. If you're dry, they often talk, over on the left, there's a little diagram and the wind blows the warm air around your body away. But on a wet hive, it's wet on all the sides and on the bottom and all the ground around it. When the wind blows past and liquid water turns into vapor, which is what happens, it cools the hive fast, just like if we're standing out there in wet clothes, same thing. It's a much bigger difference than just the wind. When it's the wind evaporating the wet surfaces all around your hive, that is very different. So that's part of why I say usually 5 frames don't work alone. Less than 5 frames doesn't work. So here's a 5-frame nuke up here. Okay, that would work. Solid wood. You could reduce the entrance. You could insulate the top. If you really wanted to, you could wrap around the sides, which actually in our really cold, wet springs is not a ridiculous idea with nukes. They're trying to hold the heat, brood at 91 to 94 degrees Fahrenheit. If you want to do smaller, here's one of those queen castles I was talking about. This one has 3 entrances. And actually, the entrances, oh, I see. Yeah, here's the entrance for this one. And then if you look on the other side of this, you would find that there's an entrance over here and an entrance over here. These plywood slats separate the 10-frame box into 3 sets of 3 frames. Here's another one down here. Looks like it's using masonite for the slats. I like masonite as well. And then here's one that's just separating a 10-frame into 2. There's more heat stability. And with the evaporative cooling and with the drops in the final last freeze, do not expect the cardboard box that your bees came in or the plastic box that they came in to really be useful unless you'd have to figure some way you could really super insulate them. Don't expect those to help you at all in making splits. They just can't hold it. And with my little thermometer up here, again, circling that low 90s, circling that queen can't fly unless the ambient temperature hits 68 to 70. I think our queens in desperation sometimes made it less than that, but we shouldn't count on it. Okay, I mentioned dearth. Dearth is real. Rain dearth and dry dearth. This is verified by the Nobel Prize winner, Karl von Frisch, I think that's his name. And he was one who studied that even 3 or 4 days of inclement weather is enough to seriously set back hive growth. They start cutting back. They have to start cannibalizing eggs. They have to start recalculating, can they raise brood or not? And there's a failure of the waggle dance strategy if you don't get consistently sunny weather. Let me skip over most of that. And there's a problem with early splits and a problem with late splits. So be confident. Read your bees, read the frames, read the colony, and then make the decision. I think I've really talked long enough. Let me check here. I'm just going to really fast. I'm going to check my slides and just see if there's anything that really is more important to look at. I was going to talk really quickly about the 3 types of I was really quickly going to talk about the 3 types of vertical splits where you conserve heat by separating the bees by queen excluder, a double screen board. This is a specialty one called a Snellgrove unit, and a cloak board using a queen excluder and also using a solid barrier at times, but the heat can still rise through. And when the solid barrier is out, all 3 of these allow the heat and pheromones to freely travel up from the lower hive, but not the queen. And it's used for a number of things. Those are 3 wonderful systems. And we do have, I think we have talks yes, on all of them. Maybe not the cloak board. We may not have actually done a talk on that in our monthly meetings. And this is the diagram. The idea, this one takes the queen excluder. Demarays use queen excluders or honey barriers. The Snell Grove uses the double screen board. And the cloak one slides in and out. The solid part slides in and out, and it uses it with the queen excluder. Now, queen excluder lets workers also travel up and down, which is fine as long as the 2 queens, if there are 2 queens, never meet each other. I think I really need to give other people a chance to talk. I can come back and do more, maybe another day. The thing I'd really like to emphasize, though, is the after split care. Whatever you do, you've got to allow, and you don't have to get it perfect. One thing is if you don't have a big out apiary, you don't have to get things perfect, and you don't have to accept a 30–40% loss. You come back the next day or 2 or a week later, and after the split, you allow for, well, the foragers are returning to the parent hive. Okay. Queen right hive is stronger than the queen cell hive, unless I deliberately did a lopsided split. And I can do that now. I can adjust afterwards, saying, if that one's got too much traffic, too much stronger than the one next to it, I'm going to move some stores. I miscalculated the brood. Maybe I've been double checked that queen the queen cell that was supposed to emerge is in fact emerging, and she is in fact laying according to using the queen rearing calendar. If one fails to thrive, there's no disease, and the swarm urge is past, I've gotten my honey production, or I'm ready to get my honey production, I recombine right as the nectar flow starts. Nectar flow with lots of space will often turn off swarm urge. It's a matter of timing. The other thing is, even if, no matter what you do, we're stuck with Varroa, the V word, I'll leave you on that cheerful thought that you have to start checking soon, and treating sooner than ever, it seems like, in the last few years. There's actually something really interesting coming up, a new citizen science project. I'll get more information to you, and Bree Price may come and talk to our club about it. I'm hoping she'll come in May. Okay, let me stop this, okay? Because I talked long enough, and I'm sure people have better ideas, right? The more they'd like to say.